At 20 years old, Calla Merritt had $11, a sleeping bag rolled into the back seat of a 2001 Civic with a cracked rear window, and a storage unit auction number written on the back of her hand in blue ink. She had driven 3 hours on a nearly empty tank to get to that auction, and she had outbid everyone in the gravel lot for Unit 114. A 10 by 20 foot box stuffed floor to ceiling with what one man in a canvas jacket called, loudly, a garbage dump. She paid $47 for it. She did not have $47. She borrowed it from a gas station attendant she had met once and cried at the pump, and she paid him back 6 months later with interest and a handwritten note. But before any of that happened, on a Tuesday afternoon in March, Calla Merritt pried open a corroded Army footlocker at the very back of that unit, lifted a false floor panel she almost missed, and found something sealed inside a waterproof box that a man named Walter Pruitt had placed there and never told a single living soul about. What was in that box would change everything she thought she understood about strangers, about kindness, and about where she had come from. The auction was not how Calla had planned her Tuesday. She had not planned anything for several months, which was part of the problem. She had aged out of the foster system in September. The state of Missouri gave her a form, a handshake, and a check for $211. Her caseworker, a tired woman named Sharon who was managing 43 other cases, told her she would be fine and seemed to believe it. Calla did not believe it, but she smiled anyway because she had been smiling at people who meant well for most of her life. She couch-surfed through October and into November, a high school friend in Joplin, a girl from her old group home in Springfield, a church basement in Branson that asked her to leave when they found out she was not actually a member. By December, she was sleeping in the Civic. She kept it clean. She had a system for that, a system for where to park overnight, a system for using truck stop bathrooms without paying for a shower, a system for stretching a $12 bag of rice and a jar of peanut butter across a full week. She had a lot of systems. Systems were what you built when you had nothing else. The hardest system to maintain was the one she had built around hope. She had learned. Through years of temporary placements and interrupted schooling, and the particular cruelty of people who meant well, that hope was a resource you had to ration like gas money. You did not spend it on outcomes you could not influence. You saved it for the things directly in front of you. You spent it on the next meal, the next parking spot, the next small decision that you could actually control. She was very good at this. It kept her functional. It also meant that when something genuinely good happened, she sometimes did not believe it right away, and she had to work her way toward it slowly, like approaching a stray animal, careful, steady, with both hands visible. The Civic was a 2001 Honda with 160,000 miles on it and a heating system that worked intermittently, and a back seat that folded down far enough to sleep on if you were under 5'5", which Calla was. She had a fleece sleeping bag rated to 20 degrees, and a foam pad from a camping discount bin, and a plastic bin under the seat where she kept her things. 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a library card for the Springfield branch, a copy of the GED Prep workbook she had already passed, but kept because it was the first test she had ever studied for and passed on her own. She had her Social Security card in a Ziploc bag. She had her foster care discharge paperwork in another one. She had $11 in her wallet, and $14 in the checking account she had opened with a $0 minimum balance at a credit union that asked no questions she could not answer. She had been trying to get a room for 2 months. The problem was the same every time. Landlords wanted first month, last month, and a deposit, and they wanted a rental history she could not produce, and they wanted an employer reference from a job she could not get without an address, and they wanted an address she could not get without a job. The circle was perfectly closed. She understood it was not personal. The system was not designed for people like her. It was designed for people who had always had a previous address. She did not tell any of this to the people at the auction. She did not tell them that the $47 she was bidding came from a gas station attendant named Dale who had watched her cry at the pump and had said nothing, and had simply pressed 2 20s and a 5 into her hand when she came inside to pay for the gas. She did not tell them that she had his phone number on a post-it note folded in her back pocket and had been rehearsing what to say when she called to pay him back. She did not tell them any of it because it was not their business, and because she had learned, early, that the moment you explained your situation to someone at an auction or a counter or a front desk, they started looking at you differently, and not in a way that helped. She bid $47 and she won, and she kept her face neutral and she accepted the padlock key from Gary the same way she accepted everything, with both hands and a short nod. It was not going to be a house. She understood that. It was going to be a dry place to sort through someone else's things. And maybe she would find something she could sell, and maybe she would not, and either way she would have spent 47 borrowed dollars learning something about what she did not know. She was fine with that. She was 20 years old and she had learned most of what she knew by doing something and being wrong about it and trying again. She did not know that she was about to stop being wrong. She was not stupid. She had a GED and a year of community college before the money ran out, and she could read a room faster than most people twice her age. What she did not have was a last name that opened doors, or a family phone number to put down on a rental application, or a single person anywhere who was expecting her to show up. The storage auction she found on a flyer taped to a laundromat bulletin board in a small town called Dellard, Missouri, population just under 2,000, tucked into the green folds of the Ozarks along a gravel road that the highway signs had largely forgotten. The flyer said Unit 114 was going up for bidding the following Tuesday. Abandoned, unpaid storage. Contents unknown. She had watched exactly one YouTube video about storage auctions. She drove to Dellard on a quarter tank of gas, parked behind the Baptist church, and walked to the auction in a pair of boots that needed resoling. There were 6 other bidders. The facility manager, a man named Gary with a clipboard and a sunburn that never quite faded, rolled up the orange door and let them all look in from the threshold, no stepping inside. That was the rule. What they saw was a wall of brown boxes, a broken recliner, 3 lamps without shades, plastic totes sealed with cracked lids, garbage bags knotted at the top, and at the very back, barely visible in the dim, a large military green footlocker with a rusted hasp. The man in the canvas jacket made his comment about the garbage dump. 2 of the other bidders laughed. One woman walked away without bidding at all. Calla bid $47 and won on the second round. Gary handed her a padlock key and a move-out date. He said it like a warning. She thanked him like it was a gift. She did not know whose unit it was. The storage facility was not required to tell her that. She did not know that the account had been in the name of a Walter R. Pruitt, retired, route carrier for the United States Postal Service, 34 years of service on rural Route 7 out of Dellard, Missouri, deceased the previous October at the age of 71. She did not know any of that yet. She only knew that she had spent 47 borrowed dollars on a room full of other people's things, and that she had nowhere else to be. She came back the next morning with a flashlight, 2 trash bags, and no real plan. The unit smelled like cedar and old paper and something faintly chemical, like WD-40 in years. The recliner was going to the curb regardless, and she dragged it to the door first. Then she started on the boxes, methodical, left to right, opening each one and sorting trash. Keep? Maybe. Most of it was keepable, if you needed things. Clothes folded with care. Kitchen items wrapped in dish towels. A set of encyclopedias with the spines worn pale. Books on bird watching, on Missouri trees, on the history of the Postal Service. She stacked those to one side. Someone had loved them. She found a tackle box full of fishing lures organized by color, each compartment snapped shut. She found a shoebox of Christmas cards going back to 1997, every one of them kept. She found a plastic bin labeled tools containing a level, a measuring tape, 3 kinds of wood glue, and a set of screwdrivers whose handles were worn smooth from use. Not the kind of wear that comes from one big project, but the slow patient wear of small repairs done over many years. She found a coffee mug that said "World's Greatest Grandpa" printed on it in the kind of font that meant someone had ordered it specifically, not grabbed it off a rack. There was no way to know if there had been grandchildren who gave it to him. There was no way to know if he had used it. But someone had wrapped it in 2 layers of newspaper before packing it. She kept sorting. The books were the thing that stopped her for a moment. Not just the bird-watching ones, though there were 3 of those, all annotated in the margins in that same light, careful pencil. But a paperback copy of a novel she had read in a group home at 14, a reading group edition with questions printed in the back. It had someone's handwriting in the margins, not notes about the story, just small things, dates and weather. March 12, very cold. June 4, good morning. August 19, heard a wood thrush for the first time this year. A whole year of small observations in the margins of someone else's story. She set the book aside. She was going to read those margins before she decided anything. She did not understand yet why any of this was here. A man organized enough to wrap a coffee mug in 2 layers of newspaper had not simply forgotten a storage unit. He had not run out of money. The monthly fee was $48, and whatever else was true of this man, he had not been sloppy with the things he cared about. There was a reason this unit existed, and a reason it had been kept for a very long time, and she did not know the reason yet, which meant she was going to go slowly and look at everything before she drew any conclusions. It was the same instinct she used in unfamiliar rooms. Look at everything. Don't assume. On top of a cardboard box labeled office in black marker, there was a pair of reading glasses folded closed, the kind you bought off a spinning rack at the drugstore for $10. They sat on a TV guide from the spring of 2009, the cover featuring a show that had been canceled long before Calla was paying attention to television. The glasses had a small chip in the left lens. They looked like they had been set down by someone who meant to come back. Clipped to the corner of the TV guide with a wooden clothespin was a crossword puzzle, torn from a newspaper, half finished. Whoever had been working it had gotten 21 across, a 6-letter word for quiet courage, and stopped. The pencil marks were light and careful, the letters of a person who took their time. She set the glasses and the crossword on the recliner arm and kept going. Near the middle of the unit, wedged between 2 plastic totes, she found a Polaroid photograph tucked into the pages of a spiral notebook. She almost missed it. The Polaroid showed a woman standing on a wooden porch, arms folded across her chest, not in anger, but in the way a person stands when the air is cold and the photo is unexpected. The woman was somewhere around 60, gray-haired, wearing a house dress and rubber-soled shoes. She was smiling just barely, the kind of smile that does not need permission. Behind her, through a screen door left open, you could see a kitchen with a yellow curtain. Calla did not know the woman. She set the photo with the glasses and the crossword. She worked for 3 hours before she reached the back wall. The footlocker was the last thing left. It was heavy. She could not slide it. She had to tilt it and rock it forward inch by inch until it caught enough light from the door to see by. The hasp was rusted nearly shut. She worked it with the flat edge of a house key for 10 minutes before it gave. Inside the footlocker was what she had expected. More folded clothes, a dress uniform still in dry cleaning plastic, a shoebox of photographs. Another box of letters bundled with rubber bands. She lifted each item out carefully and set it on the concrete floor. She was not going to throw any of it away. She had decided that already without quite realizing it. Beneath the last layer of clothes, her flashlight caught the edge of something that did not belong. A seam, running in a perfect rectangle along the inside bottom of the footlocker. She ran her thumb along it. The panel was fitted tight, but there was a gap at one corner just wide enough to get a fingernail under. She pulled. The false floor lifted out in one piece. Below it, in a space about 4 inches deep, sat a waterproof plastic box. The kind you bought to protect important papers from flood or fire, sealed with a snap latch. Inside the box was a sealed envelope, a smaller sealed envelope nested inside the first, and beneath both of those, a folded document with an official seal she did not immediately recognize. She did not open any of it right away. She sat back on her heels in the cold of the storage unit, with the Ozark winter coming in at the open door, and she held the box in both hands for a long time. Outside, a cedar waxwing landed on the chain-link fence and was gone. She opened the outer envelope first. Inside was a handwritten letter on plain white paper, 2 pages, front and back, in a steady and deliberate cursive that had clearly been learned in school a long time ago. The ink was blue. The date at the top was the previous August. The letter began, "To whoever wins the auction for Unit 114. She read it twice before she let herself read it a third time slowly. The man who had rented that unit had kept it for 15 years. He had paid the monthly fee without interruption, $48 a month, every month on time. His name was Walter Pruitt. He had been a mail carrier on rural Route 7 in and around Dellard for 34 years, and he had retired in 2015 at the age of 67, and he had kept on living in his house on Cider Mill Road with his garden and his bird feeders and his crossword puzzles until the previous October, when his heart had given out on a Tuesday morning while he was weeding the front bed. The letter explained what was in the waterproof box. The folded document with the official seal was a deed, not to the storage unit, but to his house, a paid-off, two-bedroom house on 4 acres in the Ozark Hills, with a well and a wood stove, and a garden that grew tomatoes and green beans, and a pawpaw tree in the back corner that produced more than one man could ever eat. He had placed the deed into a revocable trust. The trust had one beneficiary. The beneficiary was named as the winner of the auction for Unit 114, whoever that person turned out to be. Walter had not decided on a name because he did not know who he was looking for. He had decided on a method. He wrote, "I have spent 34 years delivering mail to people who were struggling. I have seen what it looks like when someone has nothing and nobody. If you are reading this, you had exactly enough to bid on a box of my old things and no one to ask for a better option. That is the person I mean to help. I am not interested in my son having this property because Dennis has never gone without anything he needed, and I say that with love and with sorrow both. What I am leaving behind in this house, I want to go to someone who will use it. The deed is valid. The trust documents are in the inner envelope. The lawyer who drew them up is named Rowan Shebley, and his office is in Dellard. His number is on the card." The letter continued for another half page. It was not sentimental, exactly. It was direct in the way that people are direct when they have thought about a thing for a long time and made peace with it. He wrote about the garden, which things came up on their own each spring. He wrote that the wood stove ran a little hot in the flue on the left side and needed a damper adjustment in November. He wrote that the neighbor, Loretta, kept a key and would be happy to show the place. He had not written about why he chose this particular method, the storage unit, the auction, the hiding place. That came from the smaller envelope. Calla set the letter down on the concrete floor and sat with it for a moment. The cedar waxwing or something like it moved in the tree line at the edge of the lot. She picked up the letter again and read the last line. She set the letter down a second time. She looked at the waterproof box. She looked at the folded deed inside it, and the smaller envelope she had not yet opened, and the business card for Rowan Shebley with a Dellard address and phone number printed in plain black type. She was 20 years old and she had never owned anything. Not a room, not a piece of furniture, not a plant. She had owned the Civic, technically, since the last placement's foster mother had signed the title over when Calla aged out. A gesture that Calla had understood at the time as both genuine kindness and profound guilt, and that she had accepted with the same short nod she gave everything. She had owned the clothes on her back and the things in the plastic bin and the $11. She did not allow herself to believe the deed was real. Not yet. She had been in enough situations that looked like something and turned out to be something else to know that the first rule of an unexpected good thing was, wait. Verify. Don't let yourself feel it until you know it's true. She put everything back into the waterproof box except the letter, which she folded and put in her coat pocket. She snapped the box closed, she carried it out of the storage unit and locked the door behind her. She sat in the Civic for a long time. Then she took the letter out and read it again. She read the line about the garden. She read the line about the wood stove and the flue. She read the line about the neighbor Loretta who kept a key. She read the last line again. She thought about a man she had never met, who had spent 34 years walking a mail route in the Ozark Hills, learning the names of everyone on it. She thought about what that meant, not the route itself, but the learning. Most people memorized names because they had to. A route carrier memorized names because the names were the job. But the birthday cards Chester Adwell had mentioned, the letters the man had described writing in the margins of his books, those were not about the job. Those were about paying attention. About deciding that every name on the route was worth knowing past the address. She thought about what it would have taken to set up a trust with an unusual beneficiary clause, to pay $48 a month for 15 years on a storage unit containing a waterproof box, to write a 2-page letter to a person whose name you did not know and could not guess. To decide that the person you most wanted to help was the one who would show up, at the end, with the lowest bid and the clearest need. She did not have a word for that kind of faith. She did not think she needed one. She started the Civic and drove to the address on Cider Mill Road she had pulled from the deed before she closed the box. She drove past it first without stopping, just to see it. A white clapboard house set back from a gravel lane, bare trees on all sides. A wood stove pipe coming out of the roof. A covered porch with a chair on it. A lean-to around the side stacked with split wood. She drove around the block, or what passed for a block in a town this size, which was a long rectangle of gravel roads, and came back. She parked in front for a moment. Then she drove to the post office. "I don't know your name, but I hope you'll keep the coffee on. There is nothing lonesome about that house when the stove is lit." Loretta Baines answered the door on the second knock. She was 66 years old, square-shouldered, with reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck and a dish towel folded over one arm. She had worked the front counter at the Dellard post office for 31 years and had been Walter Pruitt's supervisor for 22 of them. And when she opened the door and saw a young woman she did not recognize standing on the mat with a plastic box under her arm and the look of someone who had recently been hit by something they had not seen coming, Loretta Baines said one thing: "Come in out of that wind." Calla came in. She sat at Loretta's kitchen table, which had a pot of coffee on a trivet and a plate of something covered with a dish towel, and she put the plastic box on the table between them. She did not quite know how to explain what had happened, so she handed Loretta the letter first and waited. Loretta read it without saying anything. When she was done, she set it down and looked at the ceiling for a moment. "He never told me," she said. "He told me he was paying for that unit, but he never said why. I thought it was sentimental. I thought he was keeping Helen's things." She paused. Helen was his wife. She passed in 2011. "The Polaroid," Calla said. "The woman on the porch." Loretta looked at her. "Yes." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "How old are you?" 20. Loretta nodded once in the way of a person confirming something she had already suspected. She reached over and lifted the dish towel off the plate. It was a peach cobbler, the kind made in a cast-iron skillet. "Eat something," she said. "Then I'll take you out to the house." The house on Cider Mill Road was a mile and a half east of town on a gravel lane that ran between cedar post fences and winter-brown fields. The trees were bare, but the structure was sound. A white clapboard two-bedroom with a covered porch and a wood stove you could see through the window, and a pawpaw tree in the back corner, exactly as Walter had described. The well pump worked. The flue on the wood stove was exactly as advertised. There was a cord of split wood stacked under a lean-to on the side of the house. Loretta unlocked the door with her key and let Calla go in first. The kitchen still had the yellow curtain. She recognized it from the Polaroid, and she stood in the doorway for a moment before she walked in, because it felt like stepping into the edge of something she had not yet earned the right to understand. The word spread the way things spread in a town of 2,000 people, quietly, person to person, the way a creek runs. Within a week, Calla had been introduced to the hardware store owner, a man named Chester Adwell who fixed her porch step without charging her, to the woman who ran the food pantry on Hickory Street, who brought 2 bags of groceries and a potted rosemary plant, to 4 different neighbors who had known Walter's route, who remembered him stopping to help a broken-down car, sending birthday cards he had memorized from return addresses, keeping dry a package too large for the box and waiting in the rain to deliver it by hand. They all had a Walter story. Some of them cried a little when they told it. She found out from Chester Adwell that the previous winter, Walter had paid Chester's wood bill after Chester's furnace died in January, and Chester had 3 grandchildren staying with him. Walter had not mentioned it. Not then and not ever. Chester found out only because Walter had already died, and Chester had gone to Rowan Shibley's office to settle something else, and Shibley had mentioned it in passing. There were more stories like that, several more. She would understand why, later. A woman named Pauline Shuck drove out on a Wednesday with a mason jar of honey from her hives and stood at the door with it and said only that Walter had taken her mail to the door every single day for 6 years when her hip was bad and she could not manage the steps, and that she had never known how to thank him for it, and that she supposed she could thank whoever he had decided deserved the house. Calla took the honey and said thank you, and Pauline nodded and walked back to her truck, and that was the entirety of it. And somehow it felt like more than most long conversations she had ever had. A teenager came by on a Tuesday after school, a boy named Marcus, maybe 15, skinny, wearing a Dellard Bulldogs jacket, and said that Walter had let him sit on the covered porch for 3 winters when Marcus had not wanted to go home and had needed somewhere quiet to be. He said Walter had never asked why. He had just left the door unlocked and put a blanket on the chair. Calla asked if he wanted to come in. Marcus said no, he just wanted to say it. He left. These were not spectacular stories. They were not dramatic. They were the stories of a man who had noticed things and done small things about them for a very long time, and the cumulative weight of all that noticing was what she was feeling when the town kept showing up at her door. Loretta told her, one evening over coffee, that Walter had almost not retired, that he had put in for 2 more years in 2015, and the regional office had suggested he was past the standard age and that perhaps he should consider the transition, and that Walter had spent a month being furious about it before concluding, in his careful, deliberate way, that they were probably right. He had packed his truck on his last day and driven his route one final time, stopping at every house, handing a small card he had written himself to every person who came to the door. Loretta had one. She went to the drawer and got it, and handed it to Calla. It was a 4x6 index card, printed in Walter's careful hand. "Thank you for letting me deliver to your door for however many years it has been. It was a good route. I hope I left it better than I found it." Calla held the card for a moment. She gave it back to Loretta. There were 112 houses on Route 7. Loretta said he had made a card for every one. Calla thought about that while she scraped the porch boards. 112 index cards, each one handwritten. She thought about what it would look like if you spent your whole working life learning to see the people on your route, and then spent your retirement still paying for a storage unit on a gravel lot because you had once helped a woman named Frances Merritt, and you had not decided yet how you wanted to finish the thought. She thought about this while she stacked cedar posts, while she adjusted the flue damper in the evenings, while she fell asleep in Walter's house in the spare room, under a quilt that Loretta had brought over without asking, on a mattress that was older than she was and was perfectly fine. She thought about what a life looked like from the outside, when the person living it had never done anything for the recognition. But that week, something else happened. She called Rowan Shibley's office on a Thursday morning, and Shibley's secretary told her that the appointment she had requested could not be scheduled at present because there had been a legal filing related to the trust. She asked what kind of filing. The secretary said she was sorry, and that Mr. Shibley would contact her when he was able. By the time Gary, the facility manager, called her that same afternoon, she already knew what was coming. Her access to Unit 114 had been frozen pending a legal hold. She could not remove any further items until the matter was resolved. Gary sounded embarrassed. He told her he was sorry, that he had no choice. She thanked him anyway, because she had been thanking people who had no choice for most of her life. She kept working in the meantime. The house needed things, small things, the kind that had been deferred one season at a time. She patched a window screen with a piece she found in the shed. She scraped and resealed the porch boards on the side that caught the most weather. She rebuilt the compost corner in the garden with cedar posts Chester left on her porch one morning without knocking. She got the wood stove running at the right temperature and confirmed, just as Walter had written, that the left flue ran hot in November. She did these things steadily, every day, with the focused patience of a person who understood that the only way through a problem was straight through it. Loretta came over most evenings. She brought things: a pie, a casserole, a half-dozen eggs from the hens she kept behind her house. They sat at Walter's kitchen table, and Loretta talked about the town and about Walter and about the years before the post office had consolidated routes, and the carriers had known every name on their walk. Calla was not naive. She knew the legal hold was not a minor thing. She knew that what she had found, the house, the deed, the trust, was worth considerably more than the $47 she had paid, and that someone was going to argue that this was not how things were supposed to go. She had been in enough rooms with lawyers and caseworkers and administrators to know that paperwork was not on the side of people like her. Not automatically. She sat with that knowledge the way she sat with the cold. It was there. It was real. You kept your coat on and you kept working. She found that she was good at the solitary work. She had always been. Solitary had been her natural condition since the first placement, but there was a difference between solitary by necessity and solitary by choice, and working on the house felt like the second kind. She bought a cheap set of hand tools from a bin at a hardware sale. Chester showed her how to use a level. She learned which caulk to use on exterior wood and which on interior, and why the distinction mattered. She fixed a gutter elbow that had been draining wrong and discovered in the process that the fascia board behind it was softened by water damage and had to be replaced, which meant cutting and measuring and priming and painting, all of which she figured out from a YouTube video she watched twice in the library parking lot on her phone. She was not going to be pushed out of this house by a legal motion. She was also not going to spend every day thinking about the legal motion. She had filed her documents with Shibley. She had given him everything she found. She had done what could be done, and what remained was to keep living in the house, which was exactly what Walter had asked her to do. The Civic was still parked out front. She had moved from sleeping in it to sleeping in the house without ceremony, without marking the transition in any way she could have described. One night she was in the car. The next she was on the mattress. The car stayed in front because she paid for the storage unit's contents to be held, and some part of her did not want to act as though the question was settled until it was. But the car was where she had come from. The house was where she was. One afternoon near the end of November, she went back to the Foot Locker contents she had been allowed to remove before the freeze. She had kept everything, boxed carefully in the house's spare room. She went through the shoebox of photographs with a kind of slow attention she had not given it yet. There were pictures of Walter in uniform, young, with the serious face of a man who understood that a job meant something. There were pictures of Helen on that same porch. There were pictures of a boy at various ages, gap-toothed, then sullen, then gone from the later photos that she understood must be Dennis. She found, tucked at the bottom of the shoebox, a folded piece of newspaper. Not a whole page, a clipping, the corners soft with age. It was a notice from the Dellard Courier, dated 2009. A storage facility auction. Unit 114. She read the notice twice. She did not fully understand what it meant yet, but she kept it. What Calla found next is the reason I wanted to tell you this one. If you're still here, hit subscribe. Dennis Pruitt called on a Wednesday morning in early December. She had found his number in the trust documents, listed as next of kin, notified of the filing. She had not called him. He called her. He was 51 years old, and he spoke in the measured, careful tone of a man who had decided in advance how this conversation was going to go. He explained that he had been his father's only family. He explained that his father had not been in full possession of his faculties in the final year of his life, a claim, Calla noted. That did not appear in any of the medical records Rowan Shebley had provided. He explained that a storage unit auction was not a legitimate vehicle for estate transfer, and that the trust was improperly executed, and that his attorney had filed accordingly. He did not raise his voice. He was not rude. But there was something underneath the politeness that she recognized. It was the sound of a man who had been told his whole life that things would go to him eventually and was finding out, at 51, that eventually had come and gone while he was waiting. She listened. She said she understood he was upset. She said she hoped they could resolve it properly. She did not say anything she would not want read aloud in a courthouse. After she hung up, she sat for a while at the kitchen table. She had heard a version of Dennis's voice before. Not Dennis specifically, she did not know him, but the specific register of it, the careful measured anger underneath perfect politeness. She had heard it from caseworkers who had decided before they walked in the door that they were going to deny a thing and were simply performing the courtesy of explaining why. She had heard it from administrators at community college when they told her the financial aid hadn't processed. She had heard it from landlords who used words like unfortunately and regret while making absolutely clear that the decision was final. What she knew about that voice was that it was afraid. Not of her, specifically, not of any one person, but of what losing would mean. Dennis had built a story about his father that explained the distance between them. A story in which Walter's generosity to strangers was the reason Dennis himself had been shortchanged, the reason the warmth had always seemed to go somewhere else. That story was the scaffolding Dennis had been standing on for decades. If the story was wrong, if the strangers were not the cause but simply the expression of a man who gave what he had wherever he could, then Dennis had spent 20 or 30 years being angry at the wrong thing. She understood that. She did not excuse it, but she understood it. She called Shebley again after she hung up with Dennis and asked him the question she should have asked weeks ago. Had Walter anticipated a legal challenge? Shebley was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Yes, actually." Walter had noted in his communication to Shebley's office that Dennis would likely object, and had specifically asked Shebley to prepare documentation of the trust's intent with that possibility in mind. There was a sealed letter, filed separately from the deed documents, in Shebley's safe. It was addressed to the judge or presiding authority in any legal challenge. It laid out in Walter's own words exactly why he had structured the trust the way he had, and exactly what he expected the challenge to look like. Shebley said dryly that in 31 years of practice he had never had a client who had prepared so thoroughly for being contested. She asked if he thought they would win. He said he thought they had a strong case. He said Dennis's attorney was not wrong that the beneficiary clause was unconventional. He said that a judge who followed the letter of a state law without considering the full body of evidence might reasonably rule in Dennis's favor. He said that a judge who read the documentation carefully would understand what Walter had intended, and that he would do everything in his power to ensure the documentation was complete. She thanked him and put the phone down. She went outside and split some wood. Chester had shown her how to do that too, and she was not very good at it yet, but she was adequate, and adequate was enough for right now. The wood came apart in the cold, and she stacked it under the lean-to, one piece at a time. And the physical work helped her think the way physical work usually did, not by stopping the thoughts but by slowing them down until they were manageable. She thought about Dennis. She thought about what it would feel like to be 51, and to have spent your whole life believing a thing about your father, and then to find out, at a county courthouse in February, that the world had a different interpretation. She thought about the fact that Dennis had probably not called her out of pure greed. He had called her because the trust was proof that Walter had looked past him, one final time, and chosen someone else. She did not think about forgiving him. That was not where she was yet. But she thought about understanding him, which was a start. She did not know yet what Dennis's wound was, not fully. She would come to understand it better in the months ahead, that Walter and Dennis had a long and honest estrangement, rooted in Dennis's certainty that his father had loved the root more than his family, had given more to strangers than he had ever given to his own son. She would come to understand that Dennis was not wrong about some of it, and that Walter had known he was not wrong, and that the trust was in part an acknowledgement of that debt, a man trying to do at the end what he had not managed in the middle. She would come to understand all of that. But in December, she knew only that Dennis had filed a motion to freeze the trust and contest the deed, and that the hearing was scheduled for February. Rowan Shebley's letter arrived the next day. It was precise and thorough and not encouraging. The filing had standing, Shebley wrote, because the trust contained an unusual beneficiary clause, winner of the auction rather than a named individual, that Dennis's attorney was arguing rendered it legally void for vagueness. The deed was also in question because Walter had placed it in the trust while the storage unit was under a legal hold that predated the trust formation, and Dennis was arguing that the hold invalidated the transfer. Shebley said he believed the trust was valid. He also said Dennis had found a good attorney. She put the letter on the kitchen table next to the newspaper clipping. She looked at them both. Then she called Loretta. "I need to understand something," she said. The newspaper clipping in Walter's footlocker. The 2009 auction notice. "It's for Unit 114. There was a pause on Loretta's end. "He never mentioned it to me," Loretta said slowly. "The unit was auctioned in 2009, Calla said. "Someone bid on it. Someone won it. And then it became Walter's account." She paused. "Loretta, who owned that unit before Walter?" Loretta came over that evening with a folder she had kept in a drawer for 12 years. She sat down at the kitchen table and opened it without preamble. Inside were 3 documents: a copy of the 2009 auction notice, a receipt from the Dellard storage facility dated March 11, 2009, and a 1-page handwritten note in Walter's careful cursive. In March of 2009, Unit 114 had been auctioned because of an unpaid storage bill. The outstanding balance was $214. The property owner could not pay it. The items inside, which were boxes of household goods, clothes, photo albums, and personal papers, were going to be seized and sold or discarded. The account holder's name was Francis Merritt. Of Joplin, Missouri, Calla did not move for a moment. Loretta said, quietly, "Walter went to that auction. He bid $214 plus the monthly fee to take over the account. He transferred the items to a new unit he rented specifically to store them. That is a different unit, 89. Which he eventually cleared out in 2015. But he kept Unit 114 open. He kept paying for it. He kept it because he paid off my grandmother's debt," Calla said. "Yes, he kept paying for an empty unit." "Not empty," Loretta said. She placed her hand on the folder. "He put his things in it eventually. But he chose that unit deliberately. He chose it because it was the one that meant something." She paused. "Francis Merritt passed in 2013. He kept paying after that. He kept paying for 11 more years." Calla sat with that. Frances Merritt had been Calla's grandmother on her mother's side. Calla had met her once, maybe twice in the fractured geography of a childhood spent mostly in state care. She did not remember her clearly. She remembered a yellow kitchen curtain somewhere and a woman who smelled like lavender and told her to eat something. She looked at the Polaroid, still sitting on the kitchen counter. The woman on the porch. Her grandmother. Walter Pruitt had never met Calla. He did not know a grandchild existed. He had saved a stranger's storage unit in 2009, held it for 15 years, and placed his life savings and his property in a trust for whoever found it. Because the person who found it would be exactly the kind of person he was trying to help. He had not known it would circle back. He could not have known. He had simply kept paying, and kept faith, and let the thing find whoever it needed to find. In the smaller sealed envelope, behind the deed, was the second part of what Walter had left. It was a ledger, not the original ledger, which Shibley had in his office, but a handwritten summary in Walter's hand. 312 entries, each one a name, a date, a dollar amount, and a balance line reading 0. Some of the amounts were small, a $30 utility bill, a vet bill, a car repair. Some were not small. Each entry ended the same way. In a column Walter had labeled "Settled in full, no repayment expected." 312 people in and around Dellard, Missouri, who had once been helped by a mail carrier who had never asked for anything back. She read through the ledger entry by entry. The entries spanned 2001 to 2019, the last one dated 6 months before Walter retired. Some were a single line, a name, a date, a dollar amount, the 0 balance. Others had a brief note in parentheses, written small: furnace repair, January hard. Car battery, family of 4. Back rent, 2 months, husband lost job. The notes were not sentimental. They read like a man recording facts. But facts had weight. Entry 47, $210, November 2004. Note, medical copay. Diabetic, Chester Adwell. She looked at that one for a long time. She had assumed Chester's furnace bill was Walter's most recent act. But Chester's name was in the ledger from 2004. 20 years. Walter had been quietly helping Chester for 20 years, and Chester had mentioned only the furnace. Entry 189, $85, March 2011. No note. Name, Dora Sims. Entry 211, $1,400, September 2014. Note. First month, deposit, Route 7 rental. Name, T. Granger. She turned the page. Entry 312, $214, March 2009. Note. Storage lien, cleared, items preserved. Name, Frances Merritt. Entry 312 was the last entry. Not because Walter had stopped helping people, she was certain he had not, but because this was as far as the ledger went. He had made a decision, after Frances Merritt, to change the form. He had started keeping a different kind of record. He had started planning for what would happen when he was gone. She read that entry 3 times. The handwriting was the same as all the others. Careful, deliberate, unhurried, $214, and a note that said items preserved, as though that were simply the accurate way to describe what he had done. He had been a mail carrier. He had memorized the names on every box and slot and door on Route 7. One of those names, at some point, had been Frances Merritt of Joplin, and Frances had stored things in Dellard, and Frances had fallen behind on the bill, and Walter had gone to the auction and paid what was owed and kept the items safe, because that was what you did when someone's things were at risk. He had not known Frances well. He might have known her only as a name on an envelope. But a name on an envelope was enough for Walter Pruitt. It had always been enough. She sat at the kitchen table for a long time after she finished the ledger. She thought about her grandmother, whom she had met once or twice in the scattered geography of her childhood. She thought about what she remembered. A yellow curtain. Lavender. A woman who told her to eat something. She had not known at 9 or 10 years old that her grandmother was a woman who fell behind on storage bills and had her things put up for auction. She had not known any of the arithmetic of her grandmother's life. You do not know those things when you are 9. But Walter had known the part that mattered. He had known that Frances Merritt was someone who needed her things kept safe. He had done that. He had kept them safe for 4 more years until Frances died. And then he had kept paying for the unit, because the unit was now the record of having done a thing that no one knew about, and he was not the kind of man who needed anyone to know. She thought about the sealed box inside the footlocker. She thought about a man spending 15 years paying for a unit he had emptied, refilling it gradually with the things from his own life, the glasses and the crossword and the Polaroid, turning it from Francis Merritt's storage unit into his own, slowly, carefully. Until the day he called Rowan Shibley and said he wanted to put his house in a trust with an unusual beneficiary clause. He had been looking, all that time, for the person who would show up with the right bid. Not the highest bid. The right one. The bid that said, I have nothing and nowhere else to be, and I am going to make something of whatever is in this room. Calla read the ledger that night at the kitchen table, with the wood stove lit and the cedar waxwings gone quiet in the trees, and she understood why the town kept bringing things to her door. They were not bringing them for her. They were bringing them for Walter. They were repaying the only way they still could. At the February hearing, Shibley entered the ledger into evidence. Not as a financial document, it had no legal weight as an accounting, but as character testimony, as a record of a man's life. He also entered the 2009 auction receipt. The connection to Francis Merritt. The established pattern of Walter's intent, documented across 34 years of service and 312 quiet transactions. Dennis's attorney argued the trust's beneficiary clause. He argued it vigorously, and with some skill. But what happened next is what tends to happen when a town decides it is done being quiet. The hearing was held in the Dillard County Courthouse on a Tuesday in February, which felt appropriate. Shibley had prepared for 6 weeks. He had filed Walter's sealed letter, which the judge had read in chambers the evening before. He had prepared an exhibit package that ran to 43 pages and included the 2009 auction receipt, the chain of monthly payments, the trust formation documents, the full ledger, and a deposition from the storage facility confirming that account 114 had been maintained in Walter's name, without interruption, for 15 years. Dennis's attorney, a man from a firm in Springfield, sharp and well-organized, argued the beneficiary clause for 40 minutes. His case was not frivolous. He cited 3 Missouri precedents where imprecise beneficiary designations had been invalidated. He argued that winner of the auction was not a legally cognizable person, that the clause created a class of potential beneficiaries that could not be resolved to an individual without additional documentation, and that additional documentation had not been present in the trust as originally filed. It was a good argument. Shibley had told her it would be. Shibley's response was to introduce the full file as context for intent. He argued that the beneficiary clause was precise in the only way that mattered. It selected, by design, a specific type of person in a specific set of circumstances, and that the additional documentation, including Walter's sealed letter, made that intent unambiguous. He introduced the 2009 receipt. He introduced the connection to Francis Merritt. He told the judge, plainly and without drama, that a man had spent 15 years and approximately $8,640 maintaining a unit for the specific purpose of finding someone in exactly Calla Merritt's situation, and that it was difficult to imagine a clearer expression of intent. Loretta came to the hearing. Chester Adwell came. The woman from the food pantry came. 14 other people came who had a name in the ledger or a story about a package left dry on a rainy afternoon. The postmaster from the regional office came with Walter's service record and a letter of commendation that had sat in a file for 9 years unread. A woman named Dora Sims, 78 years old, came with a rubber-banded stack of birthday cards she had received on the correct birthday, every year for 31 years, from a man who had memorized her return address. The judge let the testimony run longer than Dennis's attorney had expected. She was a small woman with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. And she listened the way a person listens when they are not just following along but actively thinking about what they are hearing. She asked Dora Sims one question after Dora finished. How long had you known Walter Pruitt? Dora said, all my life. About 60 years. And he sent you a card on your birthday every year for 31? Every year, Dora said. Even the year my husband died. That was the year I needed it most, and it came anyway, because he had written it in advance and the mail runs regardless. The judge wrote something down. She asked Loretta one question. In your professional judgment, as his supervisor for 22 years, was Walter Pruitt a man who did things impulsively, or a man who planned carefully? Loretta said, without hesitating, he was the most deliberate man I have ever known. He checked his route sheet twice every morning. He remembered the name of every dog on the walk. He did not do anything by accident. The judge thanked her. She thanked the witnesses. She asked Dennis's attorney if he had anything further. He did not. Dennis sat at the respondent's table. He was wearing a good suit. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had spent a long time being angry about something that was partly his father's fault and partly his own, and who had hired a good attorney to protect what he believed was rightfully his, and who had not expected to sit in a county courthouse in February and watch 30 people line up to say his father's name like it was something precious. The judge reviewed the trust documents, the 2009 receipt, the established pattern of intent, and the ledger. She ruled that the beneficiary clause was unconventional but legally sufficient given the accompanying documentation establishing specific intent. The deed transfer stood. The house on Cider Mill Road and the 4 acres belonged to Calla Merritt. Dennis did not appeal. After the hearing, he waited in the hall until most of the crowd had gone. Then he walked up to Calla and stood there for a moment without speaking. He was a big man, broad-shouldered like his father must have been, and he had Walter's same careful, deliberate way of holding still. "I did not know about your grandmother," he said. "I want you to know that." "I know," she said. "He should have told me more," Dennis said. "He should have told me about the people he was helping. I might have understood better." She looked at him for a moment. "Maybe so," she said. "Maybe you can understand it now." He nodded, once in the way of a man who was not ready to say more than that. He put his hands in his coat pockets. He walked out into the February cold. She watched him go. She did not feel triumphant. She felt the particular exhaustion of something that had been complicated and was now, finally, resolved. She planted the garden in April. She did not know much about gardening, so she asked Chester, who knew enough for both of them. He came over on a Saturday with his truck and 2 of his grandchildren, and they turned the beds that Walter had last worked 2 Aprils before, and Chester showed her where the tomato starts would go and where the green beans did best, and which corner already belonged to the pawpaw tree and had for a long time. By May things were coming up on their own. Exactly as Walter had said. The tomatoes came up in the south bed, the same place they always had. The green beans ran up the trellis that Chester had helped her rebuild in April. The pawpaw tree in the back corner put out its small waxy flowers. Pawpaws bloomed before their leaves, Loretta told her, which was why people so often missed them. You had to be looking at the right time. Walter had known the right time. He had written it down in the notebook she found in the storage unit, in the margin of a page about small batch orchard management, pawpaw flowers, mid-April before leaves. Check daily. She kept the notebook on the kitchen table. She thought, sometimes, about what she would have done without the house. The question was not entirely hypothetical. Because without the house she would still have been in the Civic, still working the systems, still managing. She was good at managing. But there was a difference between managing and having somewhere to be, and she had not fully understood that difference until she had experienced the second one. The house had not made her life different in the way people assumed it would. She had not woken up on the first morning feeling saved. She had woken up cold, because she had not yet figured out the wood stove and had spent the first hour getting the fire right. But she had woken up in a house. In a kitchen with a yellow curtain. In a place that had been maintained, carefully and deliberately for her. That was what she thought about, in the garden. Not the dollar value of the house, which Loretta had mentioned once and Calla had not wanted to dwell on. The house on Cider Mill Road, Dellard, Missouri, 4 acres, paid off, was worth in the current market somewhere between $140,000 and $165,000. She had read that in the county assessor records out of curiosity. And then she had put the figure away in the same place she put all large numbers that did not yet have a job to do. It would be there when she needed it. Right now she needed to know which bed the green beans went in. What mattered was not the number. What mattered was the yellow curtain, and the glasses on the shelf, and the crossword on the corkboard with its one blank square. She had a job by then, part-time at first, at Loretta's recommendation, sorting at the post office's regional hub 20 minutes east. It was not a plan yet. It was a beginning, which was enough. She was keeping the house. She was keeping the wood stove running at the right temperature. She had learned to adjust the flue damper in November. She took the reading glasses from the TV guide and put them on a shelf in the kitchen, where she could see them from the table. She pinned the unfinished crossword to a corkboard near the door. 21 across, a 6-letter word for quiet courage. She had looked it up. The answer was grit. She left the square blank on purpose. The Polaroid of her grandmother she framed and hung in the hallway. The woman on the porch with her arms folded against the cold, smiling her small private smile. Calla did not have a clear memory of her. But she had the curtain in the kitchen, yellow and thin and letting the spring light through, and she had the sense, not logical, not provable, that the house itself remembered what she did not. In June she heard from Rowan Shibley. One of the trust provisions she had not yet acted on was a sealed secondary instruction from Walter, separate from the letter, to be delivered only after the legal matter resolved. Shibley handed it to her across his desk, and she read it there. It said, "I hope you planted the garden. And I hope, if someone comes along who is doing worse than you are, you will remember what an unlocked door felt like." In September, a girl named Audrey, 19 years old, showed up at the food pantry on Hickory Street with a broken rolling suitcase and a look that Calla recognized the way you recognize a language you learned before you can remember learning it. The food pantry volunteer called Loretta, and Loretta called Calla. Audrey had been bounced out of a group home in Springfield 2 weeks before. She had $43. She had been sleeping in a bus station. Calla drove to the pantry and introduced herself. She offered Audrey the spare room for as long as she needed it. She said there were rules, mostly about the wood stove and the garden and not leaving dishes in the sink, and that she would put them in writing if that was helpful. Audrey said yes, please, that would be helpful. Audrey cried in the truck on the way, not from sadness but from the specific exhaustion of someone who had been holding themselves together for a very long time and had finally reached a place where they did not have to anymore. Calla did not say anything. She had cried like that once, in a parking lot in Branson after a church basement had asked her to leave, and the most useful thing anyone could have done was simply drive and not comment. So she drove and did not comment, and by the time they turned onto the gravel lane, Audrey had gone quiet and was looking out the window at the cedar post fences and the November fields. They drove back to the house on Cider Mill Road in the last of the September light, past the cedar post fences and the brown gold fields and the trees just beginning to turn. Calla unlocked the door and put the coffee on and showed Audrey where things were. 313. By the following spring, the pawpaw tree was producing again. The glasses on the shelf caught the morning light the same way every day. The crossword stayed pinned to the corkboard with its one blank square. Loretta still came on most evenings, and she still brought things, and the coffee was almost always on. The storage unit had been cleared out properly in the end, every item sorted and kept or passed along with care. Because someone had kept them with care for 15 years, and that deserved to be honored. The footlocker itself sat in the corner of the spare room. The waterproof box was on the kitchen shelf, next to the glasses. Audrey was enrolled in the community college in the spring semester. She was studying to be a vet tech. She had a system for studying that she had not had before. And she had people she called when she was struggling, and she called Calla sometimes even when she was not struggling, which was a different thing entirely. Dennis Pruitt had sent a card in January. It had a cardinal on the front. Inside he had written only his name, and then below it, in small careful letters, "I'm working on it." She kept the card. Some people leave nothing behind because they gave everything away while they were still here. Walter Pruitt gave 34 years of mail routes and 312 quiet debts forgiven, and one house on 4 acres in the Ozark Hills and one very specific storage unit, and all of it to people who did not know they were being watched over until it was too late to thank him. The only thing he kept was the crossword, half finished, and the glasses, and a Polaroid of a woman he had helped once and never forgotten. The card from Dennis was on the refrigerator, held with a magnet shaped like a Missouri state outline that Loretta had given her as a housewarming present. She looked at it sometimes when she was making coffee. She did not know if Dennis and she would ever have more than the card, more than the courthouse hallway and those few careful sentences. But she had looked up his address in the county directory, and she had written him a note, not long, not complicated, telling him that his father had been a good man in all the ways that mattered, and that she was sorry for the distance between them, and that if he ever wanted to see the house he was welcome to come. She had mailed it on a Tuesday, which felt right. She had not heard back yet. But the mail ran regardless. The house still smells like cedar in the morning. The wood stove runs a little hot on the left side in November, and Calla adjusts the damper, and the coffee is always on.